So, George, you want to introduce our topic and speakers
Yeah,
today? Thank you.
absolutely. Our topic today is presentation from the Lithium-ion battery recycling advisory group. This was mandated by state law in California. And Alissa Kendall, who is our scheduled speaker, was on a flight that was delayed this morning. She was hoping to get here in time for the start. We do anticipate she will join the call sometime during the course of the call. So to kick off the meeting, Jessica Dunn will be our speaker, and then Alissa will jump in. Jessica Dunn is a PhD candidate in energy systems at University of California, Davis. And during her time as a PhD student, she served as one of the facilitators for the AB 28, that's the California legislation, Assembly Bill 28, the Lithium-ion battery recycling advisory group. And she's also a private consultant for the state of Washington and the International Energy Agency on topics related to material flows and waste from renewable energy technologies and battery systems. And prior to pursuing her doctorate, Jessica earned her master's degree from University College London in economics and policy of the environment and energy, and worked in the energy and environmental consulting industries. So Jessica, we'll turn it over to you. We typically have a fairly informal format. Sometimes there will be questions as you go, and some will hold questions till the end. So we appreciate your that informality, and we look forward to your presentation. I think you mentioned you will be at the controls, right, of your PowerPoint slides.
Yes, yeah, thank you, George. Let me put up my slides real quick. There we go. Great. So hopefully you see my slides now. Is that all set?
Yep.
Looks good.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for having me today and that great introduction. So as George said, I was a facilitator for the lithium-ion battery recycling advisory group in California. And I'll be presenting really about the policy recommendations that came out of that group and findings from it. So Alissa's will be here in the Q&A, but I believe Meg Slattery, my colleague, she's on the line as well. So she'll be here for the Q&A as well.
Good, thank you.
Yeah. So a little agenda. I don't know the level of expertise in battery recycling and this bill, so I'm going to provide a little background information, and then I'm going to talk about the advisory group process for developing these policy recommendations, and then I'll be going over the recommended policies, the policies that we discussed that didn't receive recommended support by the advisory group, and a little bit about industry development and research. So hopefully we have enough time for all of this today. So first, the California Assembly Bill 2832. So in 2018, a bill was passed by California that convened this advisory group that we've been talking about, that I'm part of. And the advisory group was made up of stakeholders, and their goal was to submit policy recommendations to the legislature that will lead to as close to 100% as possible of recycling of lithium-ion batteries at their end of life. So, you know, it's 2022 now, and we finally have those policy recommendations, but this was the kind of beginning of that process. And through that process, our team at UC Davis kind of led the facilitation and the education of the stakeholder group. So Alissa Kendall here on the left was the leader, I would say, and then Meg and I both worked with her, and Handro is a postdoc, and he kind of came in and gave educational sessions. Okay, so first I'm going to start with why this is important. Many of you probably know California is the national leader in EV uptake. We just reached the 1 million ZEVs sold, which is, I think, an amazing landmark. And as you see on the right, the graph, the EV sales just keep going up. That's, you know, that's something we want. We want electric vehicles to replace internal combustion engines. We want it to lead to lower impacts. But with those increased sales, there's also a increased retirement of these electric vehicles, which can be hazardous, which require a lot of materials. There's a lot of complications that we haven't had to deal with for internal combustion engines. And so when we look at why this bill is necessary, it's because the disposal and the recycling of these EVs are kind of different than what we've seen before for cars. And if it's not done correctly, it's potentially dangerous. And there's also a lot of materials that could be lost. So another thing is battery manufacturing is material intensive. So this means that the batteries that are manufactured use a lot of critical materials. And through recycling and looking at these end-of-life solutions, we can source a lot of these materials from these reclaimed materials, and therefore not use as much of the virgin materials. And through that, we can reduce a lot of these environmental and social issues. The mining of the materials is the largest burden of the whole EV life cycle. And this reduction through the reusing of materials and the recycling and the circular economy is really important in just reducing the overall life cycle environmental and social impacts of the vehicles. Okay, so that was an extremely fast background, but I really wanted to dive into the core material of what the advisory group has done, with a slight background of why it's really important. So looking at the advisory group, it was made up of 19 members from the automotive and battery industry, waste management, government agencies, and public interest organizations. So I will provide this slide afterwards, and you can see all the members, but I'll just kind of list off some that you guys probably know. So the California Energy Commission, the California Department of Toxic Substance Control, Californians Against Waste, Earthworks, Ford, Honda, Tesla, Surplus Services, Umacore. So those are just some that you may know. They might ring familiar, but these were 19 members with very different special interests, very different placements in this life cycle of the electric vehicle, and with different members or people in the community or businesses that they're representing. So it made for, I would say, a really eclectic group, but hopefully good policy that comes out of it. So the process for developing the recommendations, the first year was really about knowledge building. So we wanted to make sure that everybody that came into the stakeholder group, they didn't all know, everything about the technology, about the impacts, about, what, EV sales even look like. So we really wanted to make sure that everyone had a good basis and understanding. And we brought in people from academia, industry, and government agencies that could kind of give them this rounded knowledge to make good policy. So the last year was really where I think the hard work on their part came, and on our part. And so this was the policy creation process. We started with breaking the larger advisory group into 3 subcommittees to tackle different parts of the battery landscape, and then identify barriers, opportunities, and from there kind of pull policy options out that would address those barriers and address those opportunities. We went through a lot of drafts, and we did some surveys to kind of get the pulse of what people are thinking through this process, what policies they're thinking would be good, what we need to explore more. And then we had a vote, and the vote is going to be what I will present next about the policy recommendations. So as you can see, this was a large process. And from the votes, really there came some primary objectives. The first one being that responsibility of the battery at the end of life. So who is responsible for the recycling, the transportation, and all those things that was a very big key concern. And I would say rightly so, because that's the big question of who's going to recycle these if it isn't economical. Additional areas of concern included increasing access to battery information, supporting repurposing, reuse, and recycling industry development, and increasing the safety and efficiency of reverse logistics. So these were really just how do we support a recycling industry to make it more safe and efficient. So from there, I'll focus first on the policy recommendations for determining responsibility. So right now, we don't have any policy that defines responsibility. There's no party that is responsible for taking the cost of recycling to make sure those batteries do get to recycling. And because of that, it's defaulted to the owner of the vehicle. So there's not a requirement to recycle the vehicle, but the owner of the vehicle at the end of the life has the ability to put the car in their garage for the next 10 years if they wanted to, if they didn't know what to do with it and they had the space or something. They also have the ability to take it to a dismantler. They could call a recycling company, but there's no guarantee, and it also puts it on the individual. And so this was something that the advisory group had majority support to basically change. What they said was there's two versions of extended producer responsibility that were recommended. And extended producer responsibility, for those who don't know, is basically putting the burden of recycling and the costs and the logistics and all of that on the company, the OEM, the original equipment manufacturer. And that's meaning the basically auto manufacturers such as Volvo, Tesla, or Honda. But there are different levels of responsibility that can be placed, and that's kind of where we've come to. Is there were two recommended policies: core exchange and vehicle backstop, which received 93% support by voting advisory group members. So that was wildly popular, I would say. And then there's producer take back, which had 67% support by the voting members. So these are very different policies, but they do define a level of responsibility. So first, I'll go over the core exchange and vehicle backstop. There's two parts to this. Well, I would say three, but first, for batteries replaced before the EV reaches end of life, there will be a core exchange program to basically ensure that replacement battery or the battery being taken out that is being replaced will be recycled. And this is something that they left up to the OEM to decide how this core replacement program works. There's no required fee, there's nothing, no requirements besides just a program needs to be developed by the OEM to take care of this battery that's being taken out of the car before the electric vehicle has reached its end of life. This is actually, I would say, like a small portion of batteries that are reaching their end of life, because as we know, most electric vehicle batteries aren't replaced halfway through their lifetime. They're very large. For EVs reaching end of life, if it's removed from a vehicle by the dismantler is responsible for ensuring the battery is properly recycled. And if in the case that a vehicle is not removed, or a battery is not removed by the licensed dismantler, the OEM, so the vehicle manufacturer, is responsible for ensuring that the vehicle is properly recycled. So that's the first that received the highest level of support by the advisory group. But the second policy that received, I think, 67% support is a bit different in that it requires the auto manufacturer to be responsible for recycling the battery, no matter if it's removed from the vehicle or not. And so just to kind of explain what the responsibilities include, this is arranging reverse logistics, which means taking the battery basically to the recycling or reuse facility, covering the recycling costs, and documenting the proper disposal of the battery. So when we talk about ensuring proper recycling, those are the three things that are kind of under that umbrella. Okay, now to kind of the smaller policies. One barrier that we identified was access to information. So lack of information is really a barrier to safely and efficiently recycling and reusing these batteries at their end of life. Specifically, those that remove the battery need to know about the battery condition to really determine the next use. Use being if it's sent to a recycling facility because the battery doesn't have a high enough state of health or is damaged or something of the effect. So it should just go specifically to recycling. Or if the battery is in good condition and can be used for another purpose, it can then go to reuse. The people dismantling or removing the battery also need to know how to safely remove, to handle, and how to ship these. Since the batteries are all different from different vehicle manufacturers, this is a really important point because it really comes down to the safety of the people removing the battery and also the efficiency. In addition, the reuse and refurbishing companies need to know about the state of health. The state of health is basically, to simplify, the capacity or basically the amount the battery can be used in the future. And so they need to know that to basically ensure quality and provide any kind of performance guarantees if they're reselling the battery. And this can be something that's very expensive and difficult to do on these reused batteries to, I guess, measure. Recyclers also need to know the chemistry to sort batteries and process them. So it's ideal if the recyclers know the chemistry before they pick up a battery, just because the batteries are different values depending on their chemistry. And so they will know how much they are going to pay for a battery or if they're going to charge for a battery. So what came out of understanding all those barriers are 3 policies that were voted on. Physical labeling requirements. So that's putting a label on the battery so that it's accessible to anybody that looks at it or removes it. A digital identifier. So that's something where it's like a QR code, you can scan it, you can get even more information about the manufacturing requirements. And then another is the universal diagnostic system. So this is really to reduce the cost of testing and understand really what the state of health is at that point the battery is either going to be removed or if they're deciding what happens to it at the end of life. So the CARB Advanced Clean Cars 2 draft regulations, this is a battery labeling policy that's being drafted by CARB. And this is really in the advisory group. We kind of defaulted to this because there's a lot of work going on and we didn't want to create 2 different policies around the same thing. So I'm not really going to go over this, but if you are interested in looking at like what's happening and what is being required on the label, definitely go check this out. And I'll send the slides after for anyone who's interested. Okay, so our next group of policies is about repurposing, reuse, and recycling industry development. So we first, again, identified barriers and opportunities, and I'm going to go over some of these barriers. First, there's a long and kind of an unknown time frame for the permitting process in California for these hazardous waste facilities, which are the recycling facilities. There hasn't been a facility cited. I think it was over a decade. And so that gives a lot of, I guess, unknown time frame and even the ability to site in California, which we identified as a barrier. You'll see on this, this really great graph that Meg Slattery made, there are 2 dots of a planned and operating facility near California. That's really, those aren't in California, but near, meaning Arizona and Nevada. And so those are the facilities I think that, they're going on the periphery to bring in the batteries from California to recycle them, but they haven't actually sited within California where the bulk of EVs will be retiring in the future.
Jessica, George here, just jump in with a quick question. So you have, California reached the 1 million mark, right, of EVs, which I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't that close to 1/2 of the EVs in the total United States? It's somewhere in that.
Sorry, George, you're cutting out. I'm not sure if it's my connection or yours.
Yeah, maybe mine. My question is, California has about half of the EVs, and it looks like the recycling plants are right now, looks like they're elsewhere, right? So is that because of permitting anticipated permitting hurdles in California?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we believe it is. And from what we've heard of recycling companies, it is permitting hurdles that the reason for not siting within California. There is, large facilities being cited in Arizona and Nevada, specifically like Redwood Materials that's connected to Tesla. Well, not connected, but the co-founder started it, and they are recycling a lot of the scrap from the Tesla facility. So, yeah, Meg, do you want to answer that question? You raise your hand.
Yeah, just the one other factor there is also locating near where the batteries are being manufactured. So I think there's one pretty large facility that just got announced. They're planning to develop it in Georgia, and that the southeast region is also because they're recycling production scrap there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to kind of piggyback on that, right now, what is supporting the recycling facilities is mostly recycling scrap from the manufacturers. So, and along with that, recycling small electronics. So I guess we haven't seen the big wave of electric vehicles retiring yet, but it should be in the next couple of years. Okay, and so the policies that were recommended are recycling incentive packages, so trying to mitigate upfront capital costs and encourage the recycling facilities to be sited in California. DTSC permit timeline. This is really to expedite the permitting process within California. This wasn't really a new policy, but instead you'll see in the report, it's kind of piggybacking on a policy, Senate Bill 158, part of the Committee on Budget and Fiscal Review. And so really we're just citing that we support this, this bill that will increase the timeline, I guess, for permitting within California. And the third is expanding eligibility for battery storage systems. So this isn't something I actually mentioned, I think, in the last slide, but what it's saying is that we want reused batteries to have the same eligibility for incentive programs as new batteries. And so that's called SGIP, that incentive program that's currently underway. Great, and so the third policy section that we looked at is safe and efficient reverse logistics. And so barriers here that we identified were definitely the safety risks of flammability and thermal runaway at the end of life. And these are the kind of the horror stories we hear. So on the left, there's a Tesla on fire, and which, as we know, doesn't happen too often, but when it does, it's a dangerous event. And in addition is the cost of transportation. So transportation represents about 50 to 60% of total recycling costs. And that's a lot when we look at that's something we really need to reduce. And in addition, we don't really know where these EVs are at end of life, just because there's no responsibility for recycling them or requirement for recycling them. And that's something we really need to figure out to make sure that we consolidate them and have an efficient route of transportation.
Jessica?
Yeah.
Just one quick question. You're on that previous bar graph in the light green. There was hydro. Can you define hydro recycling?
Yeah, this is hydrometallurgical recycling. So it's a recycling process which basically crushes the batteries and then it uses leaching to recover the constituent materials of like cobalt, nickel, manganese, and lithium.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the, I would say this is the main recycling technology, but there's also pyrometallurgical recycling, which uses burning and heat, and then direct recycling, which is being developed at lab scale currently. It's not at industrial scale.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. So some policies that came out of this safe and efficient reverse logistics, there were a lot, as you can see. So one was the support of enforcement of unlicensed dismantlers. We saw, from a lot of our presentations and just information that there is unlicensed dismantling occurring at large scale, and this can be really dangerous when we're talking about electric vehicle batteries, just because of the high voltage and the risk at end of life. And so really this policy is just saying that we support the programs that are already in California to enforce unlicensed dismantling laws. Next, we looked at developed training materials to improve the safety and workforce capacity of just removing these vehicles or the batteries from the vehicles, either for recycling or reuse. We support transportation research, so researching how we can reduce the cost of the transportation aspect that I said, amounted to about 50 or 60%. Developing strategic collection and sorting infrastructure, also to reduce transportation costs, because there is a model which allows for the collection in certain points that will then ship out bulk shipments of these used batteries to recycling centers. So some kind of consolidation before going to recycling facilities is key. And universal waste regulations. This is another policy recommendation that really just says that we support, or the advisory group supports, reducing transportation costs and administrative burdens associated with universal waste regulations, but that's something that has to be done at the federal level. So California really has to just follow those laws and can't really make changes there. And then requiring pre-approval to bid on EVs at auctions. So this was something we actually received, the advisory group received a lot of pushback on from just due to there already kind of being a tracking systems on EVs at auctions, and that it might be additionally burdensome. So this was really to enforce or to prohibit unlicensed dismantling. But if you read the report, there's kind of it might be doubling up on some current policies. So next I'll go to policies that did not receive majority support. So a lot of these were focused on circular economy and quality recycling, which I think I can say is slightly disappointing from an environmental perspective. A lot of these were the recycled content standards, which requires a level of recycled materials to be used in the manufacturing of batteries. This is minimum material recovery rates, so requiring a certain percentage of recovery in the recycling of the batteries, third-party verification of recycling facilities, requiring design for reuse and recycling. So that's really looking at the whole life cycle when manufacturing and designing these batteries and making sure that they're easily reused and dismantled and recycled. And also the last two are reporting systems for EV batteries retired from use, and recycling and recovery rate reporting. So we can maybe talk more about this in the discussion. I realize I think I'm a little over time already, but a lot of the circular economy and requirements that would be put on the manufacturing weren't supported. And I think a lot of that comes down to not wanting to get in the way of the uptake of electric vehicles.
Jessica, you have plenty of time, so yeah.
Okay.
Take your time. I would imagine the requirement for like design standards for recycling. It sounds like that would be something that would go to a local level, like a state level, for example. But what was some of the kickback on that came up? What was the reason there was not a majority for a standard? Yeah, for a standard of design for recycle plants.
Yeah, so I would say that definitely wouldn't go down to the smaller level. I think the concern, the requiring design for reuse and recycling, that's design of the batteries. So requiring some kind of standardization design of the electric vehicle battery, not of the plants, the recycling plants. So really that's like designing for reuse and recycling in that the batteries are easily taken apart and removed from the vehicle. Yeah, I hope that clears it up. Okay, and then just really to look at like what has happened in the industry and research. We heard an announcement, I think it was a couple months ago. Time has been going at a weird pace, from Redwood Materials, that they have planned a pilot program with Ford and Volvo cars to basically pick up any electric vehicle batteries and bring them to their recycling plants. I'm sorry, Redwood Materials is a recycling plant that is located in Arizona or in Nevada at the moment. So just to give you that background knowledge. And so what they've done is they've designed a program where you can call them or contact them and tell them that you have an electric vehicle or a battery, and you don't know what to do with it and you'd like them to pick it up. And what they're doing is they're organizing those logistics and bringing the batteries to recycle at their plant. So they're contacting basically anyone they think might be holding on to these batteries, like dismantlers or even dealerships or any kind of those parties. And the goal is to basically learn by doing. So to increase efficiency and figure out how these transportation routes should work, figure out where the batteries really are, the bulk of them, and what batteries and chemistries are available. So this is a really cool program because, as you know, the transportation costs equal about 50% of recycling, which is a lot. And hopefully this kind of program at such a large scale will really inform them on how to reduce those costs and really reduce costs for everybody if they can get this increased knowledge. In addition, Resell is a national lab. They are designing a different type of recycling, so direct recycling, which is here on the right, this which recovers the full cathode instead of the constituent materials. So basically, it's a more efficient way of recycling, and so hopefully that's something that will develop in the future. And then right here on the bottom, you'll see these are storage facilities. So large scale storage facilities by BTU, which is a company here in California that has the largest basically reused storage facility that supports solar in the US. So I think it's at 17 megawatts currently, which is huge. So it's pretty cool. Yeah, and that's about it. Thanks so much for having me, and I hope maybe Alissa is online by now for some questions as well. But if not, Meg and I are happy to answer all of them.
Sure. So we'll use both the chat line and raising of your hand for questions. I'm
really
looking
quick. Sorry, Jessica, would you mind stopping your screen share?
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Good, good.
Oh, Alissa is here. She just has airport background noise. So we're happy to hear from Alissa. Thanks for joining. Okay, well, Mark, would you like to ask your question?
Sure, thanks, Jessica. So the focus of the advisory group was primarily or exclusively electric vehicle batteries. Was there any discussion going further with other lithium-ion batteries, whether it be for small electronic devices or power tools or any of that? Because that's going on right now. I mean, I'll just tell you, I had a DeWalt battery that went out on me about 2 weeks ago. And it's still sitting on my workbench. I'm trying to figure out, what do I do with it? What's the proper disposal of this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in AB 2832, the policy that passed, it was very clear that we were to focus on electric vehicle lithium-ion batteries. So we stayed very tightly in those guidelines. Obviously, it did come up, a lot about what about micro mobility and scooters, and what about large scale storage facilities. And so that is an issue. And I think a lot of the policies that were created by this advisory group could apply to those as well. And so I think that should not be forgotten, but the advisory group was very focused on the electric vehicles just because of the mandate. And also, I mean, a side note, the facilities right now, the recycling facilities are recycling a lot of small electronics. I know that like Redwood has a partnership, I think, with Amazon. So there is recycling going on for these smaller batteries, and I think Peter just pointed out that you can actually bring those small rechargeable batteries back to where you bought them. So.
We have,
Where I bought that.
we have hands. I have hands raised for Bob Whitley and Michael Kent. We'll start with Bob.
Thank you. So this was very informative topic that I didn't really think much about before the last hour. But so two thoughts. Certainly the question about permitting in California and incentivizing development of recycling centers. It seems to be, that's got to be consistent with the policy direction of requiring more batteries. We ought to be responsible to take care of what do you do with the batteries when they run out, and not put them on a train and ship them to Georgia. I mean, I just think that that's just a reaction. We ought to really reinforce your policy recommendation of getting facilities located somewhere in California, and rather than shipping it to our neighbors. The other thought was whether there was any consideration of ongoing academic level research in efficiencies and safety of the recycling, rather than just relying on an entrepreneur in Nevada to come up with the best ideas. What was there any discussion in the advisory group about that level of research?
Yeah, great question. There was not that discussion in the advisory group, but it was also not something I think we saw as a priority, because there is a lot of research going on in academia on recycling processes and efficiency, and there also is a lot of research at a national lab level. Like I mentioned, the Resell Center. They have partnerships with Argonne National Lab and also universities looking at different recycling processes that are more efficient. So direct recycling, which recovers basically the whole cathode instead of the individual materials which make up the cathode, and other kind of like processes that will reduce costs and reduce environmental impacts of recycling, and those other aspects. Thank you, Meg, for putting in the Resell Center URL in the chat. You guys can check it out there. But there's definitely a lot of research going on in that area, just because it is so important, and it's also something that industry is looking at. So I think there's a lot of different parties kind of trying to tackle this issue.
Okay, anything else, Bob?
What's the next step?
Passing this policy, I think. It has to be, yeah, it's in the legislators' hands now. So that will hopefully be next.
Right. How long a process do you anticipate for the next phase of legislation? It's probably a little bit unpredictable, I would imagine.
Yeah, I don't think I can predict that. I know legislators are excited about it. We've talked to a couple, and there's been some discussion about, already proposing some different policies based on what we've come up with. But I can't give you a timeline.
Okay. Let's go with Michael Kent question, and followed by Gary Darling.
Yeah, actually, my question is going to be how the legislature reacted to the report, and if anybody has proposed any legislation yet based on it, but you've already answered that. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Gary?
Yeah, so I was just going back to Mark Hughes's question about a lithium battery for, small tools, and we have them in our watches, and a lot of lithium batteries now are showing up, and I see. I'll put Melody Labella on on the line, at point here, because Central Sand has a household hazardous waste facility, and actually Barbara Hockett could maybe answer this as well. But it's my understanding that they would accept any and all batteries, number one, and secondly, at least For my garbage pickup, I'm allowed to put those kind of batteries in a plastic bag and set them on the recycle can. So they just get taken away at that point in time, and I assume brought to the household hazardous waste facility. So I think those are the right avenues to getting rid of those kind of batteries. But I'd open that up to anybody from Central Santa or somebody with better knowledge than myself.
I think that's a good question, Gary. And our Jean-Marc was anticipating that question and asking our household hazardous waste supervisor if we take lithium. I think you're right. I think we do take, all sorts of batteries in. But, the challenge is, what do we do with them once we get them? I mean, small batteries, we have definitely, ways to deal with them and manage them. But, somebody brought us in an electric vehicle battery. I think that would create quite a challenge for us in what to do with it. So yeah, I'll let you know when we hear back. I'll be monitoring if we get any information back, and I'll share it with the group.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Melody.
Jean.
Yes, Gary, that's a good question. You're right. As soon as I heard that, I sent an email to our HHW. I have not received. I'm sure we take small batteries. I'm sure we don't take car batteries, and I'm sure we wouldn't be taking any batteries from Tesla cars or something like that. We're not equipped for that. And I don't know the answer what we do with lithium battery once we get them, the small tool ones. So I'll get an answer and then bring it back at the next meeting.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay. Jovita Mendoza has a question.
Hi, I'm Jovita from the city of Berkeley on council. I have a question, and this is all new to me, so you might have answered this and I just didn't understand it. A lot of people around here are putting the batteries in their homes, these big, huge batteries. And I think they only last for about 10 years. And I've often wondered what we're going to do with those after they don't work in people's homes anymore. So I'm not sure if I missed that, but those are huge.
Yeah, hi, Alissa. Thanks for that question. Yeah, so that wasn't under the AB 2032 guidelines, but it's definitely an area of concern. I would say it's not been a focus just because the scale, the magnitude of scale is so much smaller than the amount of electric vehicles. And, with forecasts of electric vehicle sales, the electric vehicles are still much higher than like consumer electronics as well. So, so for these large scale, these storage systems that are in homes, hopefully when they are retiring, they will go to the recycling facilities in the same way that these electric vehicles will. And I would say also maybe in the policymaking process, that's something that can be included and should be included, which wasn't necessarily included in our report, except in the notes saying later that it should be included. But I think that's a really good point to bring up. And I want to open it also to Meg and Alissa if you have anything to add.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think also those systems are likely to last quite a long time because the power demands on them are much lower than a car. And so I would expect those systems to last, especially new ones, to last more than 10 years. And I do think our report, as Jess said in a footnote, said, hey, we should be coordinating with these other large format batteries and make sure that there's a coherent system that would also be able to manage those. But otherwise, I'd say Jess's answer is, I think, complete insofar as there are many fewer of those. So it hasn't, I think, risen up to the level of importance that managing electric vehicle end-of-life batteries have risen to.
Yeah, we've seen a big increase in our city, people installing solar panels, also installing the batteries. So that's why I'm starting to get concerned as a city. What am I going to do about it? But hopefully by the time they start falling off, we have an answer for that.
Alissa.
Yeah, and just to add on, I agree definitely with what Jess and Alissa said. I think that we did have also a footnote where we talked about battery systems in homes that are eligible for state incentives, that we kind of recommended looking into adding a requirement that whoever installs the battery be responsible for ensuring that they get recycled. And in general, I think the way that I think about this is that the actual recycling process for all of these batteries will be the same. So once they arrive at a recycling facility, whether it's from a cell phone or it's a really large format stationary storage battery or an electric vehicle battery, they all will go to the same facility and be recycled using the same process. The difference is really in how they get commissioned and what the transportation requirements are to get them there. And it's kind of more a question of logistics and who's going to be involved. And that's sort of where the nuance and policy has to come in. But I think in general, something else we were hoping was that, or not that we were hoping, but a way we were understanding this is that anything that is generally encouraging the battery recycling industry and kind of investing in that infrastructure and making sure that there are facilities will ultimately help the recycling for large stationary storage batteries, even if that's not what we were focusing on.
Great, thank you.
Hi, Marion.
Jim Fiedler's had his hand up for a while. Jim.
Oh, thank you. Very interesting conversation. You know, we have so many byproducts of the things we use in our society. So it's kind of interesting to think that we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, thinking about how to use them in the future. I have two I have two questions for you. One is, what actually are the human or environmental hazards associated with these lithium batteries that we're trying to address through recycling? And then secondly, what are other countries doing? Or maybe that's part of your research. You guys looked at what is, say, the EU doing or other areas doing, trying to wrestle with this same problem that everybody's going to have inevitably with recycling the batteries from the electric vehicles.
Yeah, I think I can talk about both of those points. The first about the environmental impacts of these batteries. There is some small risk of things like leaching and that sort of thing if they're disposed of improperly in a landfill, but the risks aren't enormous relative to other things that we throw away. I think the real challenge, there are two parts. One, a damaged lithium-ion battery at end of life, there is a risk of fire. And we've all, I know Jess showed that picture of a fire at someone's house. So that's one issue. And we want to make sure that we prevent those as much as possible. And I'm sorry, I was on a delayed flight and I'm still in the airport here. But in terms of what the rest of the world is doing, it kind of follows on that one of the reasons we want to recycle this is really to produce secondary materials to replace virgin materials. And in Europe, they have a new battery regulation. It's still in the proposal phase, but they've really thought coherently about how to design policies that not only say you must recycle at end of life, but they're also promoting sort of a domestic value chain for battery manufacturing so they can recycle domestically and then use those materials to domestically produce. And it's all in one regulation that has, 200 different parts, right? And in the US, we have no coherent regulation that thinks in that sort of circular economy perspective. And we also have a lot of differences between sort of federal laws, which really at this point focus on defining what hazardous waste is and then the implications for transport, and then state level policies, which may ban disposal in the landfill or additional measures for trying to enhance recycling. So we don't have that coherency in the US. And I think that's a big difference. And it would be great if we could think about, even if it's not one policy, think about sort of a set of policies that would actually mimic what Europe is trying to do as well.
Yeah, thank you, Alissa. We're happy you were able to join us. And I understand your flight was late. I understand you have to speak to the California Energy Commission today. I think Jessica mentioned that.
Yeah, there's a battery day at the Proterra manufacturing plant, which is an electric bus company in the city of Industry down here in Southern California. So
Good. Any other hands raised? I noticed on the chat line, Peter McGaw and Barbara Hockett both replied that regarding rechargeable batteries, any business that sells them has to accept the returns. I think that was probably answered during the discussion. But I have a question regarding, and I guess because I'm an engineer, I guess I'm curious about the process of the recycle facilities. There's going to be obviously permitting issues in California with CEQA, air emissions. also potential water reuse. And I just say, does anyone have any knowledge of the amount of water that's required? I noticed there was a term, hydro recycling that was used, but is there any information available, for example, on the plant that's being built in Georgia, on how water is used in that process, and then how water be, how would it be disposed, or how would it be reused? Where would we go for that type of research?
Well, I'll open this up to Jess and Meg as well, but I don't think we have a great handle on exactly how much water use will happen. That facility will be a hydrometallurgical, and the hydro really refers to leaching, and it's very chemical intensive.
Right.
I'm not sure what the water use looks like, and whether, how much water recycling could occur, and
Right.
that sort of thing. But it's a fantastic question. Redwood Materials is located right outside Reno, or right outside Sparks, Nevada. And obviously that's a very water constrained area, and it'd be really interesting to learn from Redwood what the water demand is for their process, because they're pretty state of the art, and also using that hydrometallurgical process.
Right. Thank you, Alissa. Okay, any other comments, questions?
Yeah, I have a question, George. This is Melody from Central San.
Yes, Melody.
Hi. So I'm still kind of reeling about the comment from Jessica about the lack of support on the advisory board, or advisory committee, I should say, regarding the, making changes at the design level of the battery, which will ultimately make these batteries more recyclable and easier to handle. So, I guess I'm just wondering what your thoughts on the way forward are on that, because, if we're going to have this circular economy, we need to start setting things up from the beginning to be better handled at the end. So I'm sure that must have been a big disappointment, I'm guessing, to this team, just speculating there. But, California wants to be the circular economy, and I feel like that's a big win that we need. So just would love to have any additional thoughts you have on that and the way forward on that issue.
Yeah, I think Jess and Meg should add to what I'm going to say. But first of all, in the public comment period, we had a large number of public comments, which echo exactly what you said, which is, hey guys, why not? Why is this not supported? And I think the thinking around there, or at least the conversation around that, had to do with, that a lot of the advisory group members wanted to avoid prescriptive design requirements for batteries. With the argument that we're still in a real growth and innovation phase, and they didn't want to have, for example, like you can only attach things with nuts and bolts and not glue, and those kinds of things that might change the way that, or limit the way that batteries might evolve. So I think that kind of captures the explanation for why a lot of the advisory group members didn't support that. This idea of prescriptive requirements during a period of innovation, which they saw as potentially problematic. Jess and Meg, please chime in with any other thoughts you have on that.
I think I'll just add one thing, that I don't think we're surprised that wasn't recommended, just because it's something that we've heard echo in the industry a lot. And it's also something there's no prescriptive requirements in the EU as well, just because there's a fear that this will, inhibit some kind of other development in the lithium-ion battery industry. But with that said, there's a lot of, I guess, support for this extended producer responsibility, where the producer is responsible for the costs of recycling. And with that, there is an inherent incentive to reduce the cost of recycling. And with that, if the batteries are designed in a way that are easily disassembled and recycled, that will then reduce the costs. So there is that I don't know if I completely agree with this or think it'll happen, but there is idea that through this extended producer responsibility, the engineers in the design phase will start to think about the recycling and reuse phase.
Thank you for your thoughts on that. And for Gary, who asked the question about Central San, no, we don't take EV lithium batteries. Lithium household batteries are accepted at Central San, and they are recycled. EV batteries, of course, are a different animal. This is the guy that deals with, you know, all sorts of household hazardous waste. Very few management options at the time, and he knows about this legislation, so he's paying attention. So thank you.
Good, thank you. Very, very good, thanks.
Bob Whitley, your hand is still up on your screen. Did you have any other questions?
Well, I guess it gets to EBLC question as to whether or not there's enough interest on this topic to get involved in the state legislative process about what's next. So that's my question.
Well, Lindy, any thoughts on that?
Thanks, George. I think my recommendation as staff would be that we wait until there's a bill, because it sounds like there's still kind of conversations happening within the legislature to formulate that. Jessica, am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, you are.
Okay, and so it might be hard for us to, you know, give any kind of commentary before they've kind of shaped what kind of legislation they're looking to introduce, unless we feel that we have some very strong comment about what we would like that language to look like, in which case we might try to understand kind of what authors are exploring this. And I imagine Jessica might have a little bit of information about that, or Alissa or Megan, as I imagine there's been some conversations, but generally we tend to wait until legislation has at least been introduced so that we can kind of give commentary on that. It's usually kind of our starting place. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that way if we feel that we have a strong opinion in one way or another about something we'd like to see in that bill.
All right. Okay. Any other questions, comments? I had just a general thought on the term extended producer responsibility for the batteries. Do you anticipate or maybe it's too early to tell, in the state legislation whether that will be part of the legislation? And if so, I guess the big question is how does that get enforced? You know, going back to the original, you know, car battery producer. EPR, was that widely discussed during your advisory group meetings?
Yeah, definitely very widely discussed. And I think some version of extended producer responsibility will be part of whatever policy emerges. In terms of enforcement, I'm not sure what it will look like. I think it's probably pretty straightforward to enforce it with respect to the vehicle OEMs, the big vehicle brands. But once these batteries might get repurposed and sort of flow through let's call it an end of life sort of ecosystem of different uses and things, I do imagine there might be some challenges there in identifying responsible parties, because there is a transfer of responsibility, like say from a vehicle maker to a repurposer, for example. And that could get kind of messy. And I don't think our advisory group and the report that we produced we didn't really discuss enforcement very well or very much. It was really more about conceptual. But I will say that the vehicle industry has a lot of experience in extended producer responsibility. All of Europe, for example, requires extended producer responsibility for vehicles. And so I think that they do have they have some understanding of how this might operate. But an unsatisfactory response from me in terms of what it would look like in California, I'm aware. Yeah. But yeah.
The enforcement, I think, is a challenge there, but that'll be interesting to watch, you know, as the process goes forward.
Yeah, and we did talk about fees related. I mean, you can imagine that there's going to be some sort of stranded batteries, right, around, and figuring out some kind of process for developing, you know, funds to support collection and things of those stranded batteries may be part of whatever emerges as well.
Okay, if there's no other questions or thoughts, I wanted to.
George, really quickly, Peter put this in the chat and I alluded to it in my comments, but I suppose just to kind of solidify the question, Meg, Jessica, or Lisa, are you familiar with an author or legislator that's already working on this bill?
Yeah, Jess, you can remind me if I get this right, but we have heard from one Assemblymember Lee, who had some proposed legislation that was withdrawn. It came out right before our report was published. So I think maybe they're gonna probably, my guess is that member may still be active with a revised version or maybe working with other folks, but that's the only one that we've heard of that actually came out. I'm not sure, Jess, anything to add there?
No, that's correct. From what I've heard in my email exchange, they've revoked it, but they're revising. So they're thinking about coming out with a new one.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll pay attention to anything that we see come out of Lee's office.
Good. All right. Well, we appreciate your time, both Alissa and Jessica. Very nice job on the presentation, and appreciate everybody in attendance today. I could see in the future having you folks come back if as the whole process evolves. It seems like we're just kind of at the beginning, and you have to look at the entire life cycle assessment. And so going forward, hopefully you can come back and talk with us again in the future. But thanks again.
Yeah, thank you. And I do apologize for the delayed flight and my inability to present, but I know Jess did a fantastic job, and I'm sure we'd be pleased to come back again.
Absolutely. So
yeah, thank you, George.
Absolutely. Gary, Darlene, or Dan, or Audrey, the other co-chairs, any closing comments?
Yeah, I just want to thank the speakers today, Alissa, Jessica, and Meg. I'm always so impressed with UC Davis being in the lead on these type of issues. And, anybody who's gone to UC Davis like myself, I'm very impressed with that institution. So thumbs up for that. Good job. Secondly, like somebody else had said earlier in their comments 2 hours ago, I hadn't really thought about this topic before. Now I'm starting to think I need to start a business in battery recycling. So thank you for educating us on that. And Jovita, are you still there from City of Berkeley?
Brentwood, yes, I am. Hi.
Oh, Brentwood. Okay. Yeah, Brentwood. Okay. So I was just wondering how you heard about it. We haven't really had people from Brentwood in the Water and Environment Task Force before. So I was just wondering how you had heard about that today.
Well, I actually signed up. You can sign up from EVLC to get emails, and I was more on the water side because I'm concerned about water and having to overbuild and how we're going to manage our water with our building. So that's why I originally signed up. But then full disclosure, my husband does sell solar, and one of his biggest concerns is the batteries. We talk about it all the time. Okay. It's something, he mentions all the time. So we just don't know how our environment is going to manage that in the future. It's a little scary from our perspective.
Okay, good. Thank you.
And our city is one of the top cities in California for solar, and people are installing batteries. So it just all came to a culmination.
Yeah, no, good line of questioning from you. Thank you. And you will want to attend next month's meeting because we are going to focus on water and regional reliability. And we've got speakers lined up from Contra Costa Water District and East Bay Mud to update us on the regional reliability. But anyhow, back to the UC Davis group. Thank you so much. This is very informative. As George mentioned, I think it is in the beginning of a conversation, and that we would like to have you come back. And so thank you very much. And I don't know, Dan or Audrey or any of the other co-chairs, any comments that they have.
Good, nothing for me.
Okay.
Yeah, great job. Thank you very much for presenting today.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all for being here. And please take
the
the survey. It's linked in the chat.